My name is Carla, and we're going to be talking a little bit about things that might be basics. But just because they're basic doesn't necessarily mean they're simple, or doesn't necessarily mean they're easy. And another thing where simple also hides our assumptions, and assumptions are often the enemy, especially when you're in early stage. So this might feel like sucking eggs to many of you. And if that is, I apologize, and I hope you enjoyed the show. And otherwise, I hope that I will contribute something helpful to at least some of you. All right, so we're going to pretty much take it from the top. Spoiler alert, the round is it's not about the round number, it's about the numbers in your round. So here's some little facts just to scare you off. Less than 1% of startups ever become unicorns. The estimates vary. And some people say that actually the failure rate for most startups, and by startups we mean formed companies, not just people with an idea, formed companies, 99.95% will fail to ever raise that first dollar, euro, pound. Under 1 in 10,000 would ever become a commercial success. And 3 out of 4 will still fail to return investors' capital. And this is a big problem for the whole ecosystem, for a million reasons, and we're going to go into that in a second. These 3 out of 4 venture-backed startups made that 99.95 filter and still fail. So there's some tripping wires that kind of happen along the way. So, some people start working in startups because they think it's sexy, it's easy, it's the new fool's gold. It's like panning for gold in the Old West, except that it's really not. Well, maybe it is, minus the death by, the century and all that, for those of you who played Oregon Trail. But at the same time, here's what this guy had to say about that. Give me a second, I need to open this bottle of water. Who in here is a startup? Please raise your hand. Who in here is an investor? Please raise your hand. Okay. I think these people are going to mob you at the end of this session. I apologize for what I've just done. How many of you know which funding round you're raising for? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you are kind of unsure? Raise your hand. Who in here is pre-seed? Seed? A? B? Okay. All right. A little bit about me and why I'm up here. So Nimbld Ventures, I'll go into that later on in this presentation. It's not really important right now. As for me, I'm what you would call a Swiss Army knife. I've gone through 6 startups. I've co-founded 5. I've been in this game for 5 years full time. I must be crazy. I have about 25 years in performing arts. So I started as a kid on stage. I went from front stage to backstage, and from there into just about everything else. Worked in a lot of small and fast-growing companies. So also here to tell you very firmly to people who are going into startups fairly early in your career, a starting up enterprise is not a startup, and a startup is not an enterprise. They're very, very different beasts. They follow different paths. So a little bit about our team. I have 2 co-founders. Inga is based in Estonia. Matt is based in Kansas City, and I am here. We are a UK limited company. And basically between the 3 of us, we kind of cover the 3 legs of the table. So I'm the Swiss Army knife. I kind of I like to operate a little bit like a fixer. I kind of stick my nose everywhere. And then Matt will stick his nose in the tools, in the tech, in the data in particular, because this is extra important in early stage, and you'll soon see why. And Inga represents the other side of the table. So she represents the investor side. She comes from venture capital, family offices, and angel syndicates. And we are open to advisors, partners, anyone who would like to be involved. Come see me afterwards. So we've just done our show of hands, so we got a bit of an idea. Most of the people here seem to be early stage. All right, so basics. What's an investment round? Why run an investment round? What's the difference between a startup and an enterprise? We just kind of went into that. Why not just bootstrap? And what's the difference between all these different sources of capital? And the thing is, why run an investment round? Well, you run it because you have specific needs. If you're running it to build a product, you're doing it wrong. If you're running it to hire people to start off with, you're doing it wrong. Raise capital for growth, for the market, to capture the market. for the product, but once you've validated your assumptions and you know it is exactly what it is you're building, and, you know, to kind of just cover you as you're getting ready to exit potentially. So, reasons why. I love this graph. So this is called the Valley of Death. I did not create this. This is actually a bit of a classic. Startups will at some point when they grow find themselves in the same swimming waters as enterprises. But that comes a little bit later. Most startups kind of just start out here. And so this is your early traction. These are your aficionados. These are the people who like all the cool tech, all the cutting edge stuff. They will love you. They are great. This is where some people will definitely advise you, and I do advise you, find your niche, find your tip of the spear. Understand who these people are, though. Understand who these people are. Know who these are. This is the tip of your spear. It's usually a small niche. Get in there and exploit the heck out of it. But then you got a problem. This is usually where capital is required. And this is what kills a lot of startups. It happens at product level. It happens at funding level. Because your early adopters, your early majority, are not the same at all as the people who first use your startup. And those companies, clients, you often rely on word of mouth. They will often look at one another for kind of a sense. You know, it's those people that start finally, you know, moving to the smartphone those years back because people really started to get it. They've heard from multiple people that it was a good thing to have, so they may eventually make the leap. Then you have the people who come after those. They're like, okay, everyone is doing it, so I might as well follow suit. And then you got the people who will fight until the bitter end to actually get into that technology. So they're very different crowds. But here's the thing: most of the money is to made here, and so you do have to eventually make your way to seducing those users there. And as you jump from here to there, you got a gap. And as you're here, you're not essentially making a lot of money. You're building your platform. You're spending a lot of money. You're going here. This kills startups. Once you've established this, and you've got this trajectory, is usually where you're able to raise. And that's going to get you through this. So cross the chasm, survive the valley of death, and accelerate your growth. Those are really the reasons why you should be raising. Okay, so we're going to make it into a nice little journey. It's like a hero's journey here. So it's like a little video game. The terms, you know, pre-seed, seed, A, B, it's all becoming a little bit more fluid these days. There's companies, there's platforms facilitating agile fundraising. That means you can kind of raise in between rounds, meaning that the traditional term of rounds starts becoming a little bit, not meaningless, but the meaning starts to shift. And so we're going to look at 3 stages here, in particular level 1, level 2, and then we'll go into level 3 just to really refresh everyone's memory on the difference between those two. So early stage. Seed used to be the first round that companies would raise for. That's why it was called seed. And there was a boom in early stage investment to such a point, there was such appetite that people started raising before the raise. They started getting that money because, you know, it's not necessarily easy to get that MVP off the ground. That stuff costs money, as you are aware. And as the sector kind of boomed, things started becoming available to companies in that kind of place. And so the pre-seed was born. But the pre-seed and the seed are not the same in any way whatsoever. So why should you raise pre-seed? My golden rule for pre-seed is raise as little as you need. As little as you need. And then seed is raise as much as you can. Pre-seed, people will take you to the cleaners. If you go to an investor that is willing to invest in something this early, they will take you to the cleaners. They will take an immense amount of equity that is not necessarily worth it. Because you should kind of be able to do a fair bit of it by yourself. And it's never been easier because now you got low code, you got no code. You can test your assumptions because here's another spoiler. An MVP is not a baby version of your product. This is the bit that a lot of people get wrong. Founders get scared and they want to make sure they cover all their bases. They try to offer as many things as they can crammed into their MVP, and that's the wrong way to look at it. What you want to do is find the tip of the spear. You want to find what your riskiest assumption is. You want to start on the problem, not on your vision of the solution. Start on the problem, really understand the problem and understand that that problem is a real problem. Because I've seen many founders that will be like, here's the problem, but here's the solution, and here's the features. Because they're so excited to talk about their product, they kind of just skip right over that. And I want to be like, whoa, back up. Where's the hole that we're trying to fix? Show me it's real. Show me it's real. And then you might have something. And if you understand that problem at a visceral level, you might quickly arrive at the conclusion that your version of the problem is not the version of the problem. It's not the solution for the problem. Let me start that again. Your version of the solution is not the solution. And the more pivots you get in the tank with whatever pre-seed money you're able to have, or your team or your time, the more pre-seeds you have in the tank, the more chance you have of getting somewhere. All the major unicorns, most of the major unicorns in the world, didn't start out looking anywhere like what they are now. They pivoted multiple times and often into completely different industries. So keep your mind open to that. The MVP serves to validate the market, to validate the problem, to validate your version of a solution. So only raise as much as you need to get there. So this is where friends, family, and fools come in. But here's another thing as well. Before you go seek out money, and this will be a major test of you as a founder, is that you show you've got the vision, the passion, you got what it takes to really pull people in with your vision, and they're willing to jump in with you. So assemble your dream trio, which is, this is not mine, it's the hustler, hacker, hipster trio. They can sometimes be condensed in maybe 2 people. One founder, honestly, is not very advisable. Like, have a backup. It's a risk strategy. Startup companies that have 2 founders have, I believe, about 50% higher chance of raising, which is huge when you're just starting out. Think also like, risk. If something happens to you, what happens to the company? And then you cannot know everything. And the most important thing as well is you cannot see the back of your own head. And this is where you need somebody else, ideally someone with a very different temperament from you, that can see the things you're not seeing. This is really who you need. So I believe it's kind of self-explanatory. And what you want to do is you want to get to a point where that founding team, you can bring in your first 100K of revenue all by yourselves. If you can prove you can do that, you may or may not have the money, but as long as you can prove that you can get there with the team you have, you're not going to be in a position to raise to hire, and that's much more attractive. So the round sizes, the fluctuation is immense because this isn't really a real round. There's no valuation. Usually this is done depending on where you are. You use a SAFE, use a convertible note in the UK. You're probably going to use an ESA, which is the UK version of a SAFE note, but this is a kind of promissory note that doesn't have a loan element attached to it, meaning that you can now apply for a program called SEIS EIS. Who here is from the UK or interested in the UK? Raise your hand. Okay. Are you aware of SEIS EIS? Ah, okay. It's wonderful. You should get it. And then to raise, you will need this. Like, don't use a SAFE note, otherwise your investors will not be able to get their benefits. We'll go into that in a second. And revenue benchmarks, all of this is immense. And you basically, this will very much hinge on your own personal network at this point. This is what you're using at this early stage. Usually, friends, family, and fools, bootstrap as much as possible for as long as possible. Only raise the minimum you need. And you should be able to move through this quickly. Don't take months to raise this money. If it's taking ages and it's not happening, maybe you have the wrong view to the solution of this problem, or you need to do more by yourself. You need to advance a little bit more. And yeah, remember, MVP is not a product, it's not a baby product, it's something different. And yeah, so usually not much in the way of actual hard metrics. And you'd be surprised how much an investor is going to be looking at your understanding of the problem and who you are as a founding team. Because if you have these 2 things nailed, the solution can transform, can evolve, and will usually be better at the end. Okay, moving on to seed. So seed, usually again, no valuation at this point. So this is for traction. So at this point, you've kind of figured out roughly, what you want to build. You have traction, but you haven't achieved product market fit. Traction is not product market fit, by the way. They're completely different things. We saw that curve. Usually revenue benchmarks have been more conservative in the UK than they are in the US. Again, depends on who you know. And if you do have metrics, if you have like ratios, this is lifetime value by customer acquisition cost. If you have a ratio of 3 or more, that's fantastic. Usually not really done at this stage. Usually a little bit later on. You want to see that again at A. which is when it really becomes required. Seed is a really important round in the sense that is usually where you have the smallest amount of experience, right? Let's just discount, like pre-seed doesn't really count. Pre-seed isn't really around. It's just an early raise. An early raise is not around. It's usually where the founders have the least experience, sometimes the least knowledge, and they will get into marriages. Lifespans of startups are ever increasing. It could be as long as a decade, and these early investors are going to be with you probably for the journey. So choose wisely. And another thing as well is here, I'm not going to say raise as little as you need. I'm going to say raise as much as you can. Ideally, as much as you can to get you to profitability or to some kind of cash flow positivity. And this is not for investors. This is not for some proof of market, because many investors won't really care necessarily about that if you're onto something bigger that you can substantiate. What it's for is that it allows you to survive. It gives you infinite runway. And this is kind of where you want to go, because there's a huge gap between these early stages and anything that comes after. And we're going to go into that in a second. Okay, so important tips. The more pivots you're able to take, the better. Protect your runway. Build infinite runway if you can. So get to a place where you can sustain. Infinite runway doesn't look like cash. It's not cash positivity. Infinite runway could be, I have a job. I'm a highly paid consultant. I work 3 hours a week and I have the rest of the time to build my startup. That's infinite runway. That's amazing. You can just keep going at this. An MVP is not a tiny product. I'm going to keep on talking about that. And know your riskiest assumptions and know your market segments. So know who your early adopters are and know who you're going to go to afterwards. Key resources. In US, when you do the Delaware C Corp, there is something called a qualified small business stock tax exemption. There might be state-specific incentives. There's not usually a lot of sovereign wealth funds or anything, but there might be some funds attached to universities that might be in areas that are relevant to you. So they might be able to invest, might be able to be early partners. These are resources at your disposal. Then there's the SBIR, STTR, which I've heard mixed reviews about, honestly. Some people say it's great. Some people say it again steers you towards a small business sort of mindset, which is not helpful. The UK is great because you've got multiple schemes and things available to you. So you've got here the SEIS, CIS, which, by the way, Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme and Enterprise Investment Scheme. So the way that looks, this is an accreditation, sort of a certification and assurance that you get from the UK tax office that you are a legit investable concern. Then it's down to the investors to meet certain criteria so they can reap the benefits. The benefits are amazing, by the way. SEIS, if I'm a SEIS investor and you got your advance assurance and I hold on to my investment for 3 years or more, that will be for the cashing out. But to start out, however much I invest in you, 50% of that I can put towards my income tax assessment as an immediate discount. Huge, right? And if the company folds, you still have the opportunity to claw some of that back. So as little as 25% of the capital is actually at risk, which is fantastic. And this is one of the reasons why the startup scene in the UK is so buoyant, because this exists. It massively de-risks early investment, massively. And obviously the hunting season is January to March because April is the end of tax year. And so you want to have these investors that are like willing to come in. But again, remember, that's going to be a marriage, so choose wisely. Enterprise investment scheme, slightly smaller kind of benefits to the investor. You can raise more on it, and a little bit fewer benefits. So they put 30% towards their income tax return, and by the way, the great thing about SCIS is that you could cash as little as you could cash out like 20x and pay no capital gains tax, which is extraordinary. You got multiple grants across the UK, starting with the famous Innovate UK. You got EMI scheme, which is a state-backed options scheme for your staff, and then you've got R&D tax credits. So any expenses in developing your product from a technical standpoint, you can put that against your taxes, which is really cool. All right, and then EU also has, various European Union grants at your disposal. So to be able to raise at this stage, it's like the further along you go, the better off you are. Because if you need to raise a lot of money to kind of see you through for a long period of time, you want to be as far along as this as you can so that your valuation is high so you can raise a lot without giving everything away. Because you don't want to be an overly diluted founder a bit further down the line, because that's going to scupper your chances to continue going. Now, difference between level 1 and level 2. Here's some cats, by the way, just to, spice things up into, yeah, that one's burning the midnight oil. This is the hustler kid. That's the hacker for sure. The other one's a no sure. All right, so difference between seed and growth. How do you know? Have you found product market fit? Can you prove it? Early traction is not product market fit. I will not go into the specifics of what product market fit is or can look like because it depends on what you're doing and who you're doing it for and where you're doing it. How's your revenue looking? Is it looking good? Is it growing? Is it steady? Is it coming from the right sources? Because people who have a tech product and run an agency on the side and have agency revenue, that's not revenue. That's just buying your runway. And how's your tech? Can you press the accelerator without it all falling apart? If yes, to all these questions, congratulations, you've made it to level 2. This is where the rubber meets the road. So you probably figured that these rounds are really down to where you are with your company. And where you are with your company will also dictate what kinds of investors you're going to speak to. Because you might have investors who are like, this is great, but we invest usually in kind of companies that have a slightly different profile. So get in touch with us when you're ready for A or B. So again, it's not the number of your raises, it's the numbers in your raise. So now we start seeing valuations. And again, generally much higher in the US than average, but averages are funny, right? Because you got like way more startups there, and you're gonna have a lot that have sort of like UK style valuations or even smaller, and then you got some that are just shooting for the stars and dragging the average with them. So round sizes, you start seeing something a little bit more predictable by this point, but still with like, wide ranges. Why wide ranges? Because again, there is no such thing as a hard and fast rule. Depends on what you're doing, depends on who you're doing it for, depends on how much money you need for what. And so, yeah, your investors at this point might be your existing investors that invested in seed. Usually those are going to be like, we will invest in you. We want to go with you the journey, and we're going to have, first dibs on the next round. So things that you want here to have in terms of metrics, at this point, the LTV to CAC ratio becomes important. At this point, you want to have that. You will need to have that, and it needs to look good, because it needs to show that you are growing. You need to have year-on-year growth that you can demonstrate, the ideal sort of ratios. And I know these numbers keep changing, and investors can correct me later if I got this wrong. But up to between 1 and 3 years, you want to be like 3xing year on year. And from that point on, you can slow a little, but you're still 2xing year on year. Revenue benchmarks, again, depends on what you're doing. It could vary widely. But you need to have scalable routes into the business. You need to understand who those clients are. You need to have, if churn rates, you need to have data on your people. Basically, all these potential clients, you got to understand them, but also you got to be able to substantiate all your assumptions. The startups that we work with, something I really love to do is to help them and guide them towards being unassailable. Be ready for all the questions to come at you. Have data for everything. Now you start accelerating. So A is that rubber meets the road kind of round. From then on, it becomes fuzzy again. So valuations can start, varying wildly. There's companies that will be a unicorn by this stage. It depends on what they're doing. Again, those years, that year-on-year growth is here again. Investors, yes. Metrics, yes. So this takes you from post product market fit to be able to expand your offering and to really start attacking those like that big majorities. So here is the trap. This is just one graphic. There's so many of these. Basically what is happening is you have a big valley. I like to say this, it's like a teenager that got a hold of like the sound system. The of you guys in the back will probably understand. You got all these little faders and they just kind of go bass and treble, and you got this belly in the middle. That's what funding looks like. Because early stage, you got things at your disposal, and sometimes not the best things. You're going to have government support, you're going to have taxes, tax breaks, you're going to have accelerators, incubators, like this is where they help you. And what's happened through the years, though, is that, remember the 99.95%? Remember the 4 out of 5 not returning the capital? Investors got burned big time. And so they started skipping down the journey, and they'd be like, I no longer want to invest in these guys. They're too young. They don't know what they're doing. I'm going to invest once they're a few years in, and there's actually reliable data, and I can safely invest. So they start moving down the journey, and then you've got this whole thing happening in early stage that sometimes creates something that I started nicknaming zombie startups. You can probably figure out why. So companies that take way too long to validate their idea, take way too long to see whether they got the right solution to the right problem. And they're kind of just in this suspended animation, like floating on grants and accelerators. The moment you take the plug out, the patient is not breathing on its own. And so be aware of that as well. Do your due diligence. Don't be like, I got the money, yay, let's just keep going. Make sure, because there's very little more damaging to a company than great marketing on a terrible product. Accelerated growth on a bad product, on a bad premise. You could just kind of speed into the wall if you do that. Now, quick one, just skipping over the difference between growth and scale. People are like, oh, it's going really well, we're scaling. No, you're not. You're growing. The moment you're scaling, you probably don't even call yourself a startup anymore, because you're probably not. So there's a few kind of ways to look at this. First one, like, how stable is your revenue? How much can you kind of rely on it? Are you in a trap of more money, more problems? The more users you have, the more resources you need to take care of them. Or are you now at the point where those curves start to separate? That's usually a good indicator. You're keeping your costs down steady, and your revenue is going up on a steady, predictable curve. Yeah, if you hit the gas on customer acquisition, are you going to speed up into a wall? Do you have everything? Like, how's your processes? How's your team? How's your tech? How's all of it? Do you have more than 10 full-time employees? Has your average growth rate been over 20% year on year over 3 years or more? And that's why a startup that is growing fast is not a scale-up, because you got to have been doing this for 3 years or more, to D and beyond. Key difference between those two. An enterprise and a startup are not the same. A startup and a scale-up are not the same. People often use those terms interchangeably. So this is a whole other conversation for another time, and we're getting on. Example timeline, again, lots of data on this, but like the average lifespan is growing. 2005, these were kind of the numbers. 2018, this is what they look like. 90th percentile, 12.4 years. Be ready for a long journey. Mind those early investors, they're gonna stay with you for most of it. Okay. Has anyone changed their mind about what funding round you think you're at? Can I see hands if anybody changed their mind? You're in it? You have. Okay. Are you further along or are you further back? Okay. Yeah, that happens. I have lots of conversations with startups where I break those news to them. Hey, now about us, what we do. Just a quick one. So I'm a romantic. We're a romantic. It's missing a little paper plane there. So the reason why I do this is that I believe that the workshop in the 1850s, where some guy was tinkering in that garage and inventing the steam engine, that's everyone here right now. It's this whole ecosystem. We are changing the world, and that's great. And the people who make that 99.95%, I can quite safely assume that they understood the problem, they got a good solution to it, and the product is probably quite good. But then 4 out of 5 of those will still fail to return investors' capital. And the failure rate between those early stages, that first round and the second round, is a staggering 80%. Sometimes even more, depending on where you are. So 4 out of 5 will not raise another dime after they raise the first round. This is terrible for everything. It's terrible for the startups who clearly show they have a good idea. And it's terrible for the investors who get burned and start skipping down that journey and become scared of investing in early stage. You want to see these on my landing page, by the way. So come up with something that on its own is relatively meaningless, but it's good as a kind of tracker. So we have a battery of tests that has, there's supposed to be some mind maps here that show you the silos. And so there's fewer here, there's more there. And we look at each of those in turn, and we give you an aggregate score, which again, is not necessarily something that you can take to an investor, but you can take the report that comes with it, that says that we've had this person who's worked in investment look at this, do a due diligence on you already. We have a tech guy that looked at your tech that shows that, yes, it's sound. Your data has been looked at and your assumptions are sound. Like, we've done all of this, and that's where the value maybe is on just the one-off, but otherwise you get a trend over time. So we basically have a circular process. We have a circular process where we kind of do a deep dive day. We do have a really close look at what you do, look at all those silos, give you an aggregate score, and from that point on, we kind of give you a plan on where to proceed from there. And we can stay close to you as an advisor. We can do hands-on work. We can introduce you to people who would do that work. We can introduce you to people who might need to know. And then we will do another deep dive day where we might zoom in. You got having problems with your product or with your due diligence or something. We will take a whole day and look at that, get you ready. And then we kind of keep moving around that circle where we do deep dive days, we give recommendations, we do another deep dive day. In between, we connect you with resources. And in particular, companies that we really want to work with are companies that are interested in expanding to the UK and or the US. But in particular, Europe across the Atlantic are people we really want to talk to. Obviously not immediately. There are 2 times where someone can do that, really early on or later on. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.